Jamey, thank you so much for your time today. It's great to see you again.
It's great to see you as well.
And at such an exciting time, the new year upon us, and you obviously made the announcement last week about Stegmaier's first release for 2021, Red Rising, which I think everyone is very excited about. How are you sort of 6 days after the initial launch of telling everyone? How are you feeling? Are you still on a high?
Yeah, I mean, this has been a game that I've been working on, that I've been thinking about since 2015 and actively working on for the last like 4 years. And then knowing that it will be published for about the last year, keeping that secret has been really hard. And so actually being able to just openly talk about it has been fun and exciting and relieving. I've loved the last 6 days.
Wonderful. I'm interested about the inner circle, because obviously you must have told some people, obviously Alex, your co-designer, the people who work with you at Stegmaier, the author, the people who publish it at Hodder. There's obviously some people that know. How big is that circle? How many people before last week knew about this? What we talk about must be about 50 people. All the playtesters too.
The playtesters, that's definitely the biggest group. I am continually amazed and grateful that our playtesters, our lead playtesters and the groups that they play with keep these things a secret, because they've known easily over a year, probably the last 18 months, they've known that it is likely that we are going to publish it. And so that circle is probably 200 people, actually, probably 150, 200 people have kept that secret.
Wow. I mean, that's the point of my question is the size of it and how trustworthy all these people clearly are, because you know how everyone, like the cult of the new seems to be the new phrase in board games right now, and rightly so. It's got some valid points, but people like me are just excited about new stuff. And when someone like there's something new, we want to hear about it. And so as soon as you release anything, it kind of sniffs out. So it's amazing these people who have kept quiet all this time for something this big. You've obviously got a lot of people you can trust. That must make you feel so good.
I feel very fortunate to have that. Yeah, trust to me goes a long way. Trust for our customers trusting us, and me trusting the people that we work with. It's incredibly important.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have. So I want to go back to when you first picked up this book and you read it. Like, there's a lot of books in this kind of genre. There's a lot of them sort of trying to grab your attention when you're in a bookstore or you're browsing online. What was the first attracted you specifically to the book?
I was trying to remember this the other day. I think I read a review in a periodical called Entertainment Weekly. Here, I don't know if it's a worldwide periodical, but it's an entertainment magazine. They review books, movies, things like that. I think I read a positive review, and I think I was like halfway through the review, and I was like, I don't want to know anything else. I just want to read this book. Dystopian fiction, sci-fi, somewhat near future, like not too far distant in the future, and some of the things they said about the characters just really intrigued me. And then I started reading, and I was hooked.
So did you read when only book one was out?
I did. Yeah, I've read pretty much. I think I've read all the books actually, pretty much on the release week or the few weeks that followed the release.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I always find that there's a different kind of group of people. Like, I am that for like the Harry Potter books, for example. When I talk to somebody who read them once they're all out, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, you're not as in the know as me. That's kind of like a funny little thing. And I'd imagine that's going to be huge for this, because there is going to be a mass migration of board gamers now reading this book. And that is a fact, because on the Red Rising Facebook group, there is a bunch of people talking about reading this book specifically because you are making that game. You are making board gamers spend money on games and now books as well. Like, that's a funny thing. How does that make you feel?
That in particular makes me feel great, and I know you're one of them. You hadn't read these books until you just said you read this one over the last 3 days, right?
Yeah. You announced it Wednesday. I ordered the book off online publisher during your hour-long Facebook Live. It arrived on Friday. I finished it about 5 hours ago today. So yeah, like I hadn't even heard these books. I'm big into this sort of world. I love these sort of things, but for one reason or another, I've never heard of them. They passed me by. And yeah, I'm really pumped and can't wait to read the next one. So yeah, you totally made me read it just because you're making a board game about it. And I kind of saw it as a prequel to the board game in that sort of way. But I'm enjoying the books as a standalone. So on the books, I'm keen to ask you a few questions about it, because on the front, I mean, I don't know if this is like a second or a third edition type thing. It's saying Ender, Katniss, and now Darrow. And it's very much putting it into the world of teen fiction with the references there to the characters from from the books that they're from. And that's kind of the perception I had when I read it. Then I started reading this book that absolutely has that kind of vibe. It has that sort of narrative. Obviously, it's the main character, Darrow, in book one. He's 16 at the start of it. I know you don't want to do any spoilers, so I won't do any here.
Yeah.
So I get why they're referenced to those characters. But the language that they use and some of the scenes, like the gore, the violence, I wouldn't recommend this to a teenager, certainly not a young teenager. So how did you feel about that when you were reading that? Because you're now trying to transfer this world into the world of a board game. It's going to be played by everybody.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I can see the comparison to like the Hunger Games, both in terms of certain things that happen in the book. And in the Hunger Games, it's a dystopian world where a bunch of kids are put together and there's death involved. They're killing each other, which is tough to watch, tough to read. But I think that also, I don't even know quite how to describe it, but it kind of ups the ante quite a bit when death is involved with anything, ups the stakes. Mm-hmm. The difference, as you mentioned here, between that and maybe a Hunger Games is that there is quite a bit of gore and violence and language. You said all those things. Those things aren't they didn't draw me to the book. They didn't draw me in. They also didn't, as an adult, they didn't necessarily push me out, but I can definitely see what you're saying that maybe as I'm talking about this book to people, that I should remember that there are maybe younger people who are reading these recommendations, and I should know that there is quite a bit of that in the book. Is there any warning on the book itself? You have it in front of you there.
After I finished it, and also I read a few chapters to my son who's just turned 8, and then stopped doing that. I then sort of looked for that, and is there anything around here that? And it doesn't. I am putting this into a world of teen fiction from my own perceptions and perhaps this little snippet on the front, but the book doesn't do that any other way. But I mean, I guess the author, he was in his early 30s when he wrote it. The character's 16. It does feel very much in that world. I'd love to go into a real bookstore and see where it's shelved. Is it in teen fiction? But sadly, we can't do those sort of things nowadays. But yeah, it's interesting to me. Like you said, it didn't bother me as an adult. It would change how I would recommend. Like, for example, I was talking to someone today and she said, I'm looking for a book for my 11-year-old. I said, maybe this isn't the one, up for everybody how they do things. But I just suggested the two things, the violence and the language. But aside from that, the thing that fascinated me was the world it creates. It's built this brilliant world. I love the class system that it's got and the clever way it's done it with the colours. And the synergies between that and the real world that you and I live in now rang true to me throughout, and that's the key thing for me. And I'm keen to hear what your thoughts are in terms of, as you were reading that book, how far into it was it that made you go, I've got to make this into a board game?
Well, back in 2014 when I read it, that was around the time that I was designing Scythe. So I may have had an inkling of an idea, but I was so focused on Scythe back then that I probably didn't think all that much about it. But it was in 2015 that I initially reached out to Pearson, his literary agent. So I don't remember the exact moment when I had the idea, or that I just knew I wanted to design a game in that world. I don't think I even had a specific mechanical idea back then, but I definitely reached out in 2015. Because you're right, the societal structure is fascinating. It's not a good thing at all. It's a wonderful allegory about some of the dangers in our world if we look at the color of people's skin and perhaps somewhat their upgrading their backgrounds instead of the content of someone's character and who they are. It's a wonderful allegory for it, but it's also a wonderful world, a wonderful playground, I think, to have a game system in, or some sort of kind of like what I did with Euphoria. Euphoria is a dystopian game where it has an interesting dystopian world. It doesn't elevate that world. It doesn't say this is a good idea, but it says this is the way this world is. It's a little different than ours. It's a cautionary tale. Here's what's different in this world.
Yeah, I think that really rings true. And as I was reading it, obviously, again, I don't want to have too many spoilers, but the challenges that it creates and the frustrations that it creates for people who are put in these classes that perhaps don't want to be in those classes feels very true into the world we have here. And it just feels to me, this needed to be a board game, and I'm just so glad that it. And then I started reading book 2 this morning when I finished this, and I don't know if you remember, you probably read it many years ago, but the opening pages of it, it lists all the icons for all the different houses. It's like, I mean, even this now looks like a rule book, like identifying this. It's just so perfect. So after reaching out to the world in your video that you posted a few years back, when you'd had 3 or 4 attempts at making it into a game, and for one reason or another it doesn't really work. I don't want to go into that now because you did a very good video covering all those points already. You sort of reached out to the world and said, I want to make this a game, but for whatever reason I can't. Someone help me out. The way I understand it is that you were then playing Fantasy Realms with Alex, your now co-designer, and the two of you went, this mechanic could work for this. Is that how it came to be?
I mean, yeah, the brief version of it, yeah. Because one of the big things I had struggled with in my designs, and even the designs that were pitched to us, was how we could encapsulate the 14 different colors in this dystopian society and make them all feel unique and have a place, but still make you as a player feel immersed in that world and not kind of like an overlord looking down at it. I wanted players to feel like they were in it, that the stakes were personal. And yeah, I was playing Fantasy Realms with Alex at a game night, and it just clicked that Fantasy Realms had 10 different suits, and Red Rising has 14, and Fantasy Realms had those 10, and each of them felt a little different, but it wasn't overly complicated. I don't know if I don't see it on your shelf. Have you played Fantasy Realms?
No. So like most people in the world, I'm now desperately trying to get my hands on a copy, and it's just sold everywhere.
Okay. It's a wonderful filler game. I see a lot of great filler games behind you on your shelf. I think it's a wonderful game, and I'm hoping people who discover Red Rising can find Fantasy Realms and vice versa.
By the looks of the current availability of it, I think that's already happened, Jamey.
Okay.
and I was watching your video on Fantasy Realms as well, and it made me want it. That your passion and energy for how 2 or 3 cards can combo to 100 points. Yeah. Totally. I'm in. I like the sound of that. That sounds a lot of fun. And I love the way that you do those videos, and you really put your mind into the designer, but you still seem to be talking about it as a fan. Like you just played this game like a fan, and it's really cool that you do that. So now that you're beyond that point, and you and Alex came together, and you realized, okay, this is the core mechanic. I want to play a card, pick up a card. I want to do this. This now works. How did that feel once you cracked it? A game that you never gave up on, but you publicly said, I've tried 4 times, it's not working, I need help. Now you're at a stage where it's finished. But at that point when you realized, no, I've cracked it, that must have felt great. Do you remember that time?
Yeah, one of the key moments was when we sat down for the first play test with Alan, who is my co-founder. And Alan is he's fun to work with. He's very cynical, and I know by looking at his face if he doesn't like a game, if he's not having fun. And we sat down. I was pretty nervous. Sat down with him and Alex for the first prototype, and we explained the rules in about 2 minutes because it's very easy to explain the rules. And then we started playing, and it just worked. And Alan was having fun, and we were having fun. And this was the first prototype. Like usually the first prototype, and not usually, the first prototype is always bad. Even for me, after designing so many games, it's always bad. And this was the exception. This one actually worked. And that was the moment where I was like, wow, we have something here. This IP that has meant so much to me, that I've wanted to create a tabletop game for so long. It's actually happening. It felt amazing. Yeah.
Cool. Having had that moment, and people that you obviously know and trust, and their opinion to you means a ton, tell you that it's good. That must have been a wonderful moment. But I guess at that point, with the IP, which is new to you, you must still have had a feeling, because the danger with IP is that there are a lot of passionate fans out there, and they've all got opinions that are incredibly strong, and those opinions of the book and the characters in the world would transfer to any type of adaptation of it, full stop. And you're about to do a very big type of adaptation in terms of, you've got to scale down the amount of characters in it, scale down the amount of text. You're going to go from 400 pages, to a small little world. It must have been nerve-wracking to think there's so many passionate fans out there. And I've seen you talk so much about the reasons why initially those prototypes didn't work for you, because you didn't feel like you were immersing people in the world. You talk so much about theme in that video. Now you feel like you've cracked that. Do you hold hopes that not the new fans like me, but the hardcores that are out there with you reading book 1 when only book 1 was out, do you feel confident that they're going to be happy with what you've done?
I hope so. I think we've done a pretty good job of it. And I think part of the element that was a huge asset was that the first artist, Justin Wong, and one of the latter 2 artists who helped us finish and did a lot of the work, really, Miles Bensky, were big fans of the series. And so they had been visualizing these characters for a long time as they were reading the books as artists from the artist's perspective. So it was one of those things where if it had been my responsibility to describe every little detail of every character to an artist and try to get them to replicate that, I think I would definitely would have missed some things. I think the artist would have missed some things. But to have those two artists that knew the series so well and be able to capture the look of these characters, I'm sure there will be some people who disagree with the way they were looking, that they look. I totally appreciate that. I mean, there are many different art styles we could have approached. But down to like at one point, Miles pointed out, Jamey, you've got one of the scars on the wrong side of this character's face. You need to flip this character around. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. I'm glad you noticed that, because that's the type of thing that a super fan would notice.
Absolutely, yeah, that would drive them crazy. This game's rubbish just because of that.
Right.
Yeah, it's difficult. Again, I don't want to go into it too much, but obviously in this world, you've got these different types of people at the top of the golds, and they're kind of depicted in a godlike sort of way. And so in the book, they describe how these people look and how they are and how they're different to other people in quite strong detail. And so you're really, obviously, as a reader, visualizing that a lot in your head about what they look like. So having now seen the representations from the artists that you've worked with here bring to life their vision of what they look like compared to mine, when mine is so fresh, it was quite challenging for me. But I'd imagine people who had in their minds how these people look for the last 5-6 years, that would be even a bigger thing. But from my limited new perspective, I think you've nailed it, and it looks wonderful. But it's a difficult thing because they're kind of created as like godlike characters almost. So how can you even draw them as humans? And with shimmering hair, how can you reflect that?
And that's one of the reasons, actually, the golds in particular. There are 14 different colors in the game, and there's 7 cards of each color. But there's so many golds that have specific names and you spend a lot of time with. We put 21 of them in the game, so way more than any other color. A lot of focus definitely went into those golds, and it's one of the reasons, like that you mentioned the shimmering hair, that we put gold foil on the collector's edition cards. It's not foil on the characters themselves, but it's on the sidebar of the cards, because I wanted them to, when you see one of them in the game, I wanted them to feel special, even if it's not necessarily the best card for your hand or what you're playing. I wanted it to feel, it's special. So that's one of the ways that I try to capture that. Use the word godlike. They view themselves that way, at least in the world, and I think that's what we were trying to capture in the look of the game.
Absolutely. I mean, I can't wait to get my hands on the game and have a play and understand it. And I've got so many questions that I want to ask that I'm not going to, because I know you're keen on not revealing too much stuff. But in terms of the way that you've represented the world that's been created in the board game and the characters that you brought, obviously, like you said, you can't take them all. It sounds like you're very, very happy with that. Do you think that as a player, once people finish playing this game for the first, second, third time, if they have read these books, that they will think, I've just been a part of Red Rising? Do you think that's going to land with people?
That's a good question. I think when I play the game, I know that I feel that I am immersed in the world of the characters in particular. One thing that we avoided intentionally was revealing plot and story details. Mm-hmm. So there are some games out there where you kind of like some of the Lord of the Rings games where you kind of feel like you're going through the journey to Mordor. That isn't in Red Rising, because one of my big motivations here was to introduce people to the Red Rising world, and so I didn't want to spoil anything. So it's very much not a plot-driven game. So I think if there are people looking for that experience where they want to play through the story of Red Rising, they will not get that through the game. But if they want to experience what it is like to live in the world of Red Rising, I think they will definitely get that feeling through the game.
So you've brought the world and the sense of the class divides and the struggles that each of those will have. And I saw today on the design diary you talked about today, the end game scenarios. That fascinates me, because you're if I've read that and understood that right, you're trying to go up either 2 or 3 of those depending on the game length that you want. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, the game end is triggered either when any number of players have reached all 3 end game conditions. So like if you have 7 helium, I have 7 influence, and say I also have 7 on the fleet track, that'll trigger the end of the game, because those are the 3 conditions. Or if any one player has reached 2 of those conditions. So it does feel from the very beginning of the game, there's a little bit of tension there, because all of a sudden, like there's no time to wait. You can't just bide your time and build up your combos. You are being pressed with a sense of urgency and tension right from the first turn. Yeah.
And that to me sounds like you've nailed the previous question, because the way you described that to somebody who's never even heard of this would be like, okay, that sounds like a cool thing, like a Euro where I'm trying to get this to get that and add this to add that and go up these charts and then get all my points. Fine, very take out the theme of it, that works for me. Whereas somebody who might have read the books, they're like, yeah, I totally makes sense. The helium links with this and this links with that and the influence here. So it sounds to me like it's going to happen, but obviously I'm talking about this months before I play the game, but it sounds like you're going to have nailed it. So I've got a couple of other questions on the mechanics. In the video that you released about the 4 that didn't quite make the cut, you talked about one of them having the I cut, you choose mechanic, which I know is something that you've talked about in the past, and it's a mechanic that you love. I know there's games that you talked about that use it and stuff. So that now to me still feels like a big, massive Jamey Stegmaier mechanic you haven't yet employed into a game. So yeah. I guess you know where I'm leading here. You must still have a burning desire to have a I cut, you choose game, right? Is that the case?
It is. And I'm even thinking of the games that I'm working on right now. And none of them have it yet. As much as I love that mechanism, either I cut, you choose, or I price, you choose, like in Castles of Magic and Ludwig. We don't have it yet. That is one that I would definitely like to add. There was a mechanism early in some of the versions of Red Rising, maybe this is what I mentioned in the video, where there's a choice that characters have to make early in the first book, maybe a third of the way. That is a perfect I cut, you choose mechanism. I tried to get that in the game, but it just didn't quite work out. Do you have a favorite I cut, you choose game, Jim?
I think I'm the same as you. Based on your recommendation, I bought Hannah Mikoji and video, and my boy and I play that all the time. We absolutely love it because it's just so simple, and so many of the core mechanics work on that. And that, I think the reason why I love that mechanic is probably why most do, which is that you've got this tough decision where you don't want to give something away, but you have to because everything's good. And I like decisions in games where everything's good. It's just one might be maybe less good or might be not good. But also with Hannah Mikoji, you're kind of trying to bluff, going, "Well, look, put these two down. You want these two, don't you?" It's a fun mechanic. I know you're a fan of that game too.
Yeah, I love Hannah Mikoji. And really, there is a little bit of that. It's not I cut, you choose, but there's a little bit of that in Red Rising, because when you deploy a card from hand, you are choosing which location it goes on. And so you are essentially, you have to think about what other players want and what they don't want. So if I see that you maybe are going heavy helium, and I think maybe you have some cards in hand that give you extra points for helium, I may put a card that you don't want on the helium location so that you ignore that card. Or I might, if it's a card that I think you do want, I might put it on a different location so that you can't get it from the helium location. You can't get more helium but from getting the character. So it's not quite I cut, you choose, but there is you're constantly thinking about what other players want and what they need.
Okay, yeah, that sounds interesting. Yeah. On the mechanics, I've got another question, which is something I've been trying to ask you for a long time now. When you're making a game and you're thinking about the different mechanics that might work for it, I guess a large part of that is the mechanics that exist in the world right now. Can I add worker placement? Can I add engine building? For you, maybe trying to implement an I cut, you choose, or whatever that may be, or playing fancy realms and thinking, wow, this cool idea works brilliantly for that. Yeah. But someone somewhere is going to invent a new mechanic at some point, and in 50 years' time, we're going to have board games from mechanics that you and I haven't even heard of yet. Does that keep you up at night?
Yeah, I mean, I would love. I mean, well, with any game, I think there are like little mechanisms that are new, but usually they're really subtle, really small. I try to talk about them in my videos. But you're right; it's very rare that there's like a new mechanical category that someone creates that's added to Board Game Geek. I would love to create such a category, especially if it inspires other people to go down that path as well. I've seen a little bit of that with some of our games, but yeah, I would love to do that. Although, really, in the end, I just want to make fun games. So whether or not there's a legacy of a new mechanism that I create, or if it's just a fun game that people enjoy, that's the ultimate goal for me.
For sure, but the challenge as a designer, as such as you are, and that's one hat that you wear. But when you put a designer hat on, for me, it must be just that thought of, right, okay, what's completely new? What's never been done before? What would completely blow the world away? And if someone like me had to sit there and predict, okay, in 50 years there's going to be these new mechanics, who is it that comes up with them? I would come up with a short list of probably 10 people that I think might be one of the people that would do that, and you'd be one of those. And so that's why I asked the question, does it keep you up at night? Because there must be loads of other people in the world that have a similar sort of opinion to me, and they're sort of sitting there going, what's Jamey's new game going to be like? What's the theme? What's the mechanics? What's the background? What's the inspiration? And I know one time there's going to be something completely brand new, and that part of it fascinates me. Do you have sessions specifically when you're sitting there thinking about trying to think of ways to adapt old mechanics or come up with new mechanics? Is that a thing that exists in a designer's mind?
Oh yeah, yeah. I do a lot of pencil and paper brainstorming, and during those sessions, there's often I am often thinking about existing mechanisms and how they can work for a theme, how they can work for that particular game. But I'm always trying to ask, like, has this already been done really well? And if so, I need to do something different. I don't want to make the same game that's already been created. So I am often thinking about it from that perspective. And I also have a long list of mechanisms that I just, like, little ideas where I wake up at 3 a.m., I have an idea, I jot it down, and I put it on my list. And I revisit that list whenever I'm designing the game. There's lots of things on that list that I would say are brand new and innovative, but I don't know if they would actually function at all. They're just, the inkling of ideas at this point. Sure.
The biggest one for me that I would love someone in the board game industry to come up with is a cool way to fight. I love how inside and fighting is obviously not a big part of Scythe, but it normally happens once or twice.
Yeah.
There's no dice. Most fighting is all about dice, and you've got the cards, you've got the dials. I like that, and there's some difference in terms of how you can try and trick or maybe bluff and use the power. I like that. I think that's a really cool thing. But I still feel like there's a fighting mechanic out there that completely blows the world away, that is about building up the resources that you've got, building up the strength of your own army that you've got, but employing the powers you've got in a way that the opposition army doesn't really know. And the interesting thing about this book is, again, no spoilers, there's some encounters in this first book, where things happen. And I feel like there's 2 or 3 moments where the author has really tried to think about cool ways that the character can encounter other people in smart ways. And one or two of those encounters are quite fresh and quite new to me. So it always interested me whether or not you ever considered this to be, I know you don't really want to do a war game, but a game that had those sorts of elements of battle in it. Was that ever a consideration?
Yeah, combat was in a few of the early iterations. There was a little bit of direct player interaction in the final version, but it's not combat. It's not deep immersive combat. But yeah, it did cross my mind. And I want to ask you, as you were talking about that, I wanted to ask, have you played Dune Imperium?
No, I love Dune so much. The original, well, not the remake. That's one of my favorite games of all time. Regularly makes my top 10. And so Dune Imperium was sort of like, I don't know, it's kind of, I don't know. I really want to play it, and I think I'm going to love it, but I haven't played it yet. No, it's quite hard to get hold of in the UK right now.
Here too. But I'm curious what you think about the combat in that, because I think it has a really clever, diceless, thematic combat system that I love. I mean, it would definitely be in my top 10 if I did a list of top 10 favorite combat mechanisms between players.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you see any synergies between that and this? Because a few people I've been speaking to about this game have said, oh, brilliant, Red Rising means I don't have to buy Dune Imperium anymore. And I'm like, really? Are the two games similar?
Oh, I love Dune Imperium. I hope people give both a try. But I think there are some parallels, especially, I can say for me personally, I played Dune Imperium without knowing anything about the world of Dune. Mm-hmm. And the more I've played Dune Imperium, even from the first play, I was fascinated by that world. I wanted to know more, and I felt like I was experiencing thematic moments in the world even without having read the books. And there are 4 different factions in the game that you can try to influence, and the things that you gain from those factions in the game really feel like they're what they are, or what they must be in the books. Mm. So that's the same thing I was trying to capture in Red Rising 18 months, a year ago when I was working on it before I played Dune Imperium.
Okay, that's good to hear. I think ultimately everyone's going to end up trying to buy everything, right? It's just the order in which you play. Right. What's your priority? So last question. I'm conscious I've taken a lot of your time. I'm interested in the fact that this time we've done a collector's edition, which is not a normal thing for Stegmaier games. And obviously, with the way that people want their board games, it makes sense to me. Some people want all the shiny bits with all the bells and whistles, and they want it to be as beautiful production as possible. But that obviously means that the price has to go up. So it seems to me to make sense to then have another opportunity that makes it a little bit more scalable and affordable for other people. Is it as simple as that as to why you've done it?
That is certainly part of the motivation. There are games that we've made like Tapestry, which ended up being a $100 game, very expensive. There are probably different approaches that we could have gone with that. We could have offered maybe a retail version and then an upgrade pack for the miniatures, things like that. Pendulum is a game that we probably could have made even nicer, but it might have bumped it above the price point that we thought would be reasonable for people. For Red Rising, it was particularly, because it's not an IP, I wanted to experiment with offering both. So we created a standard retail version, which is priced a lot lower, but still high quality components. The gameplay is exactly the same, but priced basically for people who love the books, but aren't used to spending a fair amount of money for games. Like you and I are used to the cost of games, but someone who knows nothing about games, who's used to seeing Monopoly for $15 on the shelf at their store, is going to be a little surprised. So we wanted to offer a better price for that. But at the same time, I knew that there are also fans of games and of Red Rising who want a fancy version. And so we thought this would be the opportunity to try a collector's edition with one of our games. The one catch I did learn that I should throw in here is that I found that our localization partners do not like the idea of us offering two versions, because then they have to choose between the two versions. Most of those partners rely heavily on distributor sales, and we do too, but we have a pretty good audience of people who buy directly from us now, so we can offer something like this directly. So they have said in very clear terms that in the future they would prefer that we just offer one standard version of the game and then an upgrade pack for those who want to upgrade, who want to have, metal tokens or coins or whatever. Yeah.
Right. Wow. You can never keep everybody happy. I think you finally come onto the solution that everyone's happy with, but no, there's still somebody that's not cool about it. That's well, maybe next time you do the regular version with the upgrade pack, and then someone will moan and go, well, it doesn't fit in the box and blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's always, isn't there?
Yeah. That was actually one of the challenges. Yeah. So I wanted to have a nice custom insert in here, but if we were going to, and we are selling an upgrade pack for the collector's edition, but it won't include the custom insert because it's essentially the size of the game. At that point, you might as well just buy the game. And so, yeah.
It's difficult, isn't it? I do find it funny. Like, we're all here for this beautiful, wonderful hobby of sitting down and playing games. But ultimately, once we get comfortable with that and we kind of get to know the hobby a bit more, we know a few designers, we know a few people, that's when people start moaning about things. It's like, come on, guys, let's remember why we're here in the first place. A face up, phones down, engagement with our friends and family, which is what you bring to me and my family and so many people around the world. And for that, Jamey, I want to thank you. Thank you for your time today. I can't wait for the game to release and to hear what everyone thinks. I can't wait to get my hands on it and play it myself. I wish you the best with it. I'm sure it's going to be a huge success. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time as well, Jim. I really appreciate it.